In the leadership world, we call that the hero leader. The one standing on the mountain, everybody lines up, there's kind of this conformity, and we follow the heroic individual. That's breaking down. It's not sufficient anymore.
Entrepreneurial leadership is starting from a strength of emotional and social competence, an entrepreneurial mindset that enables you to interact, engage, connect with your team in a way that collectively you pursue new, innovative, challenging opportunities in the world.
The world is evolving. The problems we're facing are too big to be solved by any organization alone. A lot is uncertain, but one thing is for sure, change is coming. And the voices you've just heard are the people driving it, entrepreneurial leaders. Welcome to From Problems to Possibilities, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Action, presented by Babson College. On this podcast, we'll meet the entrepreneurial leaders in the Babson community and beyond who are working on solving some of the world's biggest problems with the passion and skills that the world needs today. How does an entrepreneurial leader look at a problem and then get to the solution? I'm your host, Maddie Poirier, and together we'll go from problems to possibilities. Hello, and welcome to Babson College's new podcast, From Problems to Possibilities, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Action. We're so excited to introduce this podcast. We'll be sharing stories of entrepreneurial leaders all over the globe who are pursuing solutions to the world's biggest challenges, and we'll take you right to where they're working on these issues. But before we get started, we thought we should answer a couple of important questions. What is entrepreneurial leadership? And how can entrepreneurial leaders solve the problems that have perplexed so many others? Fortunately, at Babson, we've been studying entrepreneurship, and new research from Babson College faculty proposes that entrepreneurial leadership is a paradigm-shifting model that could have long-term impacts for businesses and organizations of all kinds. This research builds on Babson's long-standing expertise as the #1 school for entrepreneurship for 3 decades. In much the same way that the college revolutionized entrepreneurial education as a discipline that could be learned and developed, Babson is advancing the field of entrepreneurial leadership. So, to outline how entrepreneurial leadership actually works, we've got 2 of Babson's foremost researchers here today, namely Professor Scott Taylor, Professor of Organizational Behavior in the Arthur M. Blank Endowed Chair for Values-Based Leadership, and Professor Danna Greenberg, the Walter H. Carpenter Professor of Organizational Behavior, also serving as the Associate Dean of the Faculty Division and Chair of the Management Division. They have co-authored with 4 colleagues a recently published paper that offers the first academic model for how entrepreneurial leaders can move teams from problems to possibilities. We'll go now to Babson's campus in Massachusetts to listen as they discuss this cutting-edge research, and you'll hear me from time to time to give a little more context or ask a question. We're going from problems to possibilities here on this podcast. Let's talk about why some of these big, complex problems like global conflicts or environmental challenges, for example, are so hard for people to solve. How does complex problem solving relate back to leadership?
Well, there's 2 things going on in terms of complexity and challenge. One is these long-standing challenges that have existed for decades. You think about in the United States, healthcare. You think about inequality, opportunity for education. On a larger scale, you think about the UN sustainability goals. How much have we moved the dial on some of those very relevant, very important goals? You look at global conflicts. And then more recently, you look at the emergence of technology and the complexity that's creating for individuals and organizations in being able to learn, adapt to those challenges. We don't think it's an issue of we're not smart enough as a human species to solve complex issues. It's not an issue of the fact that we don't have resources to do so. And for us, it comes back to this issue of leadership? And to what degree are you bringing people together in a collaborative way to work through those challenges?
Absolutely. The other piece I would add is I think we have a myth about leadership, particularly in this country, but globally, when we think about this idea, we call it romancing leadership. It's been around for a long time. We have this expectation that a singular individual can lead an organization to solve these complex problems. I'm not sure I agree, but perhaps it was true at an earlier point in time, but these problems are so complicated, no individual and no singular organization can solve them. So we're really thinking about how do we come together? How do we come together with varying perspective, different expertise, different skills, and work together to move the dial, to enable us to solve complex problems, create strong, thriving organizations that help the world.
That's exactly right, Danna. In the leadership world, we call that the hero leader, the one standing on the mountain. Everybody lines up. There's kind of this conformity, and we follow the heroic individual. And that's breaking down. It's not sufficient anymore.
And we know, based upon our decades of research on these topics, it is actually a group of people bringing ideas forward. And so that's really what led us down this path of thinking about entrepreneurial leadership in a different way.
So to summarize, the research team knew that based on this idea of the hero leader becoming insufficient, and that leadership often actually evolves from a group of people bringing ideas forward, there had to be a new model for solving big, complex problems, right? So the paper they were writing was really looking at the mechanics of entrepreneurial leadership in different settings. So what were some of the questions the team was trying to answer?
But really at a high level, how do you unleash human potential, human capability, is another kind of driving thought as we went through writing this paper. Because at the end of the day, you're going to need that potential, that capability unleashed to solve these complex challenges. And what are the mechanisms that make that most likely to happen? So that you bring the collective capacity of each individual involved, whether it be a team, whether it be an organization, whether it be even at a societal level. How do you unleash that?
I mean, when you think about the fact that you want people to take risks, to try new things, we know they're going to fail, they're going to make mistakes in that, and to be able to do that, they have to be in relationship with the leader, they have to trust the leader, they have to feel a connection that enables them to do things that can be really scary.
So that was really the initial drivers, and as we started to look at how entrepreneurial leadership was being treated in the academic literature, we saw some of these gaps, if you will. And then the last thing is there's a lot of insight and learning that's come out in the last 20 years about some of these very things, about human motivation, about the importance of relationships, social groups, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, creativity and its link to motivation, and all of that new science, if you will, and framed our thinking as well.
So when we wrote the initial book on entrepreneurial leadership, which I think was published in 2011, I would say we were still operating at a fairly high level perspective of the ideas that we now put forth in a much more nuanced way.
We're pivoting just a little bit here to reference the book, The New Entrepreneurial Leader, which set the stage for some of the work on entrepreneurial leadership that's being published now. The book really looks at things like self and social awareness, cognitive ambidexterity, and other high-level concepts that entrepreneurial leaders develop to succeed. But how does the current work help put those concepts into practical terms?
Scott was just talking about the idea that our understanding of individuals, of relationships, our understanding of neuroscience, all of those dynamics helps us now better understand what is entrepreneurial leadership. And what we actually do in this paper is say, how do you actually now do that? And so what's really exciting when I look back and look forward is we've developed a conceptual model that really gives entrepreneurial leaders very specific guidance around these basic ideas that were introduced in the book. And that change, that nuanced understanding, detailed understanding, is actually why we do research. Because it's by doing the kind of social behavioral research that we do that over time we can now create a more nuanced understanding of an idea.
And so what is entrepreneurial leadership? How do we define it?
Entrepreneurial leadership is the leader having a deep emotional social competence, particularly self-awareness and empathy, that allow them to then focus outward on other people. And we know from years, decades of research on leadership that outstanding leaders are outward focused. They're inner directed by their self-awareness, by their values, by their vision, by their goals and aspirations, but they're outward focused on others. And what's critical in terms of the difference between a traditional leadership and entrepreneurial leadership, as we're defining it, is it's also, though, having an entrepreneurial mindset, interacting with that emotional and social competence. Because of that, they're able to motivate, and we talk explicitly how they go about motivating the intrinsic motivation of other people, which leads to their creativity, their innovation, their entrepreneurial mindset, if you will. And then the coming together of that relationship and that collective entrepreneurial mindset leading to outcomes that entrepreneurial leaders are able to inspire.
Entrepreneurial leadership is starting from a strength of emotional and social competence and entrepreneurial mindset that enables you to interact, engage, connect with your team in a way that collectively you pursue new, innovative, challenging opportunities in the world.
Yeah. Whether they be ventures, new ventures, whether they be corporate innovation, whether it be solving complex issues in society or even within dynamics within a team. All of that applies to that definition.
That last piece you said is so important, and we haven't talked about it yet, is when we talk about entrepreneurial leadership, we're not talking about a singular type of organization. We're not talking a startup organization. We're not even talking a corporate organization. We're thinking, when we think about this in the work that we already do, working with doctors, we're working with individuals in state governments, we're working with individuals in law enforcement, bringing these ideas to the work that they're doing. And we're also not talking about it in terms of a title. One can be an entrepreneurial leader from any position in the organization. And in our teaching with undergraduate students, we see that very much so. What they learn and experiences here at Babson enables them to engage as entrepreneurial leaders, even at an entry level into an organization.
So what are some of the prerequisites to being an entrepreneurial leader? Let's talk about values.
We need people that have taken the time to understand themselves so that they have an anchor for decision making and an anchor to reach out and relate to other people. And values is a part of that. Part of the challenge of working with other people is understanding those intersections where our values meet up and where they may differ.
So for us, when we think about the importance to values to entrepreneurial leadership, we're not talking about holding a specific set of values. Right? We don't tell leaders, we don't work with our students and say, oh, these are the values you have to be an entrepreneurial leader. That's not the conversation. What you do need to understand are, what are my core values? What are things for me that maybe feel really non-negotiable, so that when I'm in relationship with someone else, I understand why I'm responding as I am. I can understand that, I can process it, I can even stop it, so that I can make myself more open to somebody else's perspective that may be different than my own, so that I can learn, so that I can think creatively about how we put those two ideas together.
Arthur Blank.
I'm going to jump in here because I just want to make sure everybody knows who Scott is speaking about. Arthur M. Blank is a renowned entrepreneur and philanthropist who is best known as the co-founder of the Home Depot and owns and operates the Blank family of businesses, including the NFL's Atlanta Falcons, MLS's Atlanta United, the PGA Tour Superstore, and Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. An alumnus of Babson, he's also the chairman of the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation and the benefactor of the Blank School for Entrepreneurial Leadership at Babson College. Okay, now back to our conversation.
Arthur Blank is very clear. He's done the work to understand what values he thinks are essential to effective business and to human interaction, relating with one another. And what he's done is built organizations where others have come in that share those values. And they're broad enough that they're incredibly inclusive in that regard.
So we've had an opportunity to do a lot of innovative work with different members of the organization, and they always talk about those core values and how it drives their thinking about the world, their creativity in the world. And so we see that how an entrepreneurial leader can actually infuse that through very large connected pieces of an organization and through all the different levels of the organization. I think it's equally important to think about entrepreneurial leaders who are in very different kinds of places and different kinds of companies. And we even talk about it with our students a lot.
So talk about how we teach entrepreneurial leadership based on your findings. How can people develop this skill set?
Yeah, when we started thinking about entrepreneurial leadership, we wanted to break down some of the myths that are out there. Like, as Danna mentioned earlier, you have to be an entrepreneur to be an entrepreneur leader. You have to be a hero on top of the mountain to be a leader. Another myth is that certain people have these capabilities and others don't. The rest are hopeless losers. And that's just not the case. And so as we looked at the research and we looked at how leadership has evolved and how, frankly, entrepreneurship has evolved, we started to see a stronger awareness that these are developable capabilities. Emotional and social competence has been well defined as a capability that everyone can develop. Self-awareness, empathy, and other competencies that make up emotional and social intelligence. But also an entrepreneurial mindset. Being open and receptive, being forward-thinking, seeing growth opportunities as opposed to limitations is something that people can develop. Even the ability, cognitive flexibility as it's historically been called, the ability to move through different cognitive states, like being empathetically cognitive versus analytically cognitive. They don't activate at the same time, but we can increase our efficiency in moving back and forth between these two cognitive states. We can increase that efficiency through practice. And so, in some regards, think about entrepreneurial leadership as a muscle, and we can strengthen that muscle. We can develop greater capability with that muscle through practice with other people.
And what's really wonderful is we've got parallel research that shows us that.
Yeah.
Right? So this is sort of the excitement of all the work that we've been doing over the past 10, 15, 20 years since when you talk about the original book. So we've got new research. Lily Christina, a colleague of ours in entrepreneurship, has led a team of us, and we've done work looking at how do students learn these key capabilities that Scott just mentioned. And we know now that when students are in a classroom environment where they're on long-term experiential projects, working in teams, making mistakes, being given support and coaching and guidance from faculty and an opportunity to try again and make new mistakes, and again get that coaching and support and get theory and concepts that help them understand what those experiences are about, they start to develop those very capabilities. And we see this in our own teaching and our own work in our FME, our foundational program, over the course of the year, making mistakes, getting support from faculty. They develop this resilience and this entrepreneurial mindset, and we're doing similar things in our graduate program.
So if entrepreneurial leadership is a skill set that anyone can develop, what's possible?
I'd ask the question, what isn't possible? Right? I mean, that's why we do what we do at the end of the day. There are big challenges in front of us. They are too complicated. We don't have answers. I don't sit here with any answers, but I know every day I interact with really smart, really engaged, value-based individuals, whether it be my 18-year-old undergraduate student or my 50-something-year-old CEO. And I truly believe by exposing them to these ideas, by helping them better understand the nuances of themselves, their mindset, how they engage with others, that's the path to solving these problems.
Thanks for joining us for our very first episode of From Problems to Possibilities. And thanks to our guests, Scott and Danna, and be sure to check out their work, which is linked in our show notes. Coming up in our next episode of From Problems to Possibilities, join us as we speak with entrepreneurial leaders who are working on women's health issues.
What it left me realizing was that we needed a whole new group of innovators and an ecosystem really to create a new wave of women's health innovations in the U.S.
You're listening to From Problems to Possibilities, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Action, presented by Babson College. On this podcast, we hear about how entrepreneurial leaders identify and solve problems in our world straight from the people that make it happen every day in Babson's global community and beyond. I'm your host, Maddie Poirier from Babson College here in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Until next time.